Welcome to Rev Shots, your weekly dose of quick hit wisdom, where we tackle the most pressing topics of the day for ourselves and our revenue teams. Our show features expert guests with decades of experience. We delve into what works and why, sharing tools to be unapologetically successful, from making our number to delighting our clients. If you're ready to boost your knowledge in under 30 minutes on a weekly basis, tune in. Follow me on LinkedIn or join our mailing list to stay updated on our latest features. Hello, everybody, and happy Friday. Pete, it's so great to see you. We are here
Hi.
for Rev Shots, episode number 69. Everybody, can you believe that? We're over a year and a half in at this point. And
Wow.
as you all know, right, this show is designed to give you practical, quick hits of wisdom from people that have been there, done that. We've all been there trying to find answers, and man alive, God bless AI and ChatGPT and whatever platform you're using and as an answer engine. Sometimes we need people, and that's what this show is all about. So thank you for joining us today, Pete. I am so excited that our paths have crossed in so many ways. So thank you for joining us today.
My pleasure. I'm glad that we got the memo to match.
I always wear red, and so yeah, it's just a branding thing, I guess. I'm like, I can do that. I can do the quick and easy. So thank you.
Yeah, you and Tiger Woods, right? Ready to close it out strong.
Game day. So thank you for joining us, Pete. We are going to jump right in, and I love your background. I think you are one of the most amazing leaders that we have the opportunity to get to know. So tell us a little bit about your background and where you're at today.
Yeah, for sure. So my name is Pete Kazanjy. I'm one of the founders of Atrium. We make sales performance management software. We have hundreds of customers that use our software to, measure, manage, and improve the performance of their sales teams. Prior to Atrium, my background is actually in product management and kind of product marketing. So, and transitioned into sales when in my last software company, which was a recruiting software company, I realized that software doesn't sell itself. And it needed someone to sell it, and so I was our first seller, our first sales manager, and then our first sales leader. We were eventually acquired by Monster Worldwide in 2014, and so kind of through that transition from being a business generalist founder to our first seller, sales manager, sales leader, et cetera. Eventually, we had 20 or odd people in the sales organization. That's where I kind of first kind of got my hands dirty with respect to process excellent, operationally excellent sales. And then subsequent to that, wrote a book called Founding Sales that is kind of like the go-to for early stage founders and software companies to kind of for 0 to 1 selling kind of understanding. And then also started the nation's largest sales operations and leadership community, Modern Sales Pros. So to think a little bit about, process excellent, analytically excellent sales management and sales performance. And I think that's kind of what we're going to talk about today.
Absolutely. Pete, thank you so much. I'm going to make a note to a couple of things. One, get your book. And two, actually join, because I think I was a part of Modern Sales Pros and it was amazing. And I somehow fell off that wagon for some reason. So make sure I get back into those communities, because having been a part of Modern Sales Pros, there's a lot of great content there and great people. And I'm sure your book is fantastic. And I love what you're talking about too, which is the framework, right? And sometimes people, we poo-poo or eschew the fact that we need a framework because we can't have execution without a good strategy.
Right.
Both, right? You can't over-index one or the other, right? All that jazz, but you need both at the end of the day. So
definitely. Yeah. And I think this is something, so I know that your audience, and you guys in Rev Shots, you guys like to talk about what's one big thing that folks 100%. Are hearing about. I mean, my life largely involves talking with sales organizations that are looking to improve the performance of their sales teams, and so I kind of have a little bit of a selection bias there, but like what I hear a lot from organizations is a refocus on performance and and accountability and
Mm,
essentially like managing to that.
okay.
This is something that's been over the last few years has it's been a tough environment for a lot of organizations, especially during the go-go years of like the zero interest rate
Yes.
policy era, kind of like 2020, 2021, early 2022. You had a lot of hot money flying around that made it such that performance kind of came naturally. A lot of inbound, right?
Right.
A lot of inbound, high win rates, a lot of attrition in sales organizations, a lot of a lot of money looking to hire salespeople, et cetera, et cetera. So, kind of had a situation where sales management, sales leadership were like one organizations were attaining without kind of like having to break a sweat oftentimes,
Yeah.
and then the second thing was is that even if you had a desire to manage more proactively on the front foot, there was always a concern that you would potentially engender attrition in your sales organization as a result, like in a market that was flush with capital. And of course that changed pretty substantially the second half of 2022 into 2023 and 2024. And organizations have now kind of have been turning and saying like, okay, cool, it's time to like go back to the future and actually have more meaningful performance management and goals, not like from a quota attainment standpoint, because like organizations always have that, but like paying attention to like more leading indicators and holding people accountable to those and looking at those things, not just on a QBR basis, but like a monthly basis or even a weekly basis, to make sure that like a manager is holding their reps accountable to the things that they ought to be doing from an activity standpoint, pipe gen, pipe hygiene, pipe advancement, all those sort of things. So that's something that whereas I think a lot of leaders always kind of had that top of mind when they were like more like biting their tongue, if you
Correct.
will.
Yeah.
Um, Whereas now it's kind of like, yeah, guys, this is like always how it was. And like, when I was coming up in the 90s or when I was coming up in the early 2000s or the early 2010s, this is kind of like how sales has always been.
Right.
Well, welcome to reality. And now we actually have to facilitate that.
Yeah. That's a really good point, Pete. And I think too, right? Everything is a cycle, and we know that. And I agree with you. So I just want to recap a little bit. What we're hearing is we went from everything is free and easy, and we're shepherding to, which kills me, right? Because nothing in life is free. Like, come on,
Yeah,
people. To kind of a return to leadership 101
sure.
and
Well said.
accountability.
Mhm.
And okay. And so, but with that, we also have a different set of leaders in seat. So I agree with you on the overart.
Mm.
Well, I would say I'm seeing the same thing where we're
Sure.
definitely seeing kind of a return to this. How am I an effective leader? Because accountability and micromanagement are two very different things.
Mm.
And I think we live in a world where those get conflated.
Mhm.
And so, what to that point, like, what is the big problem you're hearing right now in getting there, in getting to this leadership first mentality? And I mean, honestly, and then how is Atrium solving it? I looked at your product, I've seen it, love
Yeah.
it. I'm a huge fan. I love coaching, leadership, accountability, because we need to get better. But we also need to make sure, like, some people don't want to be criticized and come out with a sledgehammer, and some people do. So, what are you hearing? Like, how are people going through this evolution?
Yeah. So I mean, I think there's a bunch of things like wobbly things that are making it such that like leaders like CROs or VPs of sales have to do a couple things to kind of catch up their frontline
Yeah,
management, and then also just kind of like set appropriate expectations with ICs and what have you.
correct.
So the first thing is that if you think about, and I have a 7-year-old, Deanna, I know that you have a
Yeah,
couple of teenagers, et
yeah,
cetera. I think kind of like understanding the environment in which a lot of like junior staff have come up in the last like 10 years is very, very helpful. Um, so, one example of that would be that, most of the junior sellers that are kind of in like, in the early 20s or even verging into like the late 20s or what have you, they came up in an environment that's highly mediated
Yes.
via smartphones, right?
Yeah.
So not as much experience with like face-to-face communication, even phone communication, because like the notion of like hanging out on the phone after school or like going to the mall after school, that is largely like virtualized now. So like people hang out on Snapchat and they hang out on Instagram or what have you. And so I think that there's one thing there around like discomfort around kind of like contentious conversations and kind of like face-to-face communication. That's one thing. The other thing too is that sales engagement software like the Outreaches and the Sales Lofts of the world, those kind of came around in like 2016, 2018, really got to scale at that point. So there's actually a fairly large generation of kind of junior sellers who are now in their mid 20s, even in version of their late 20s, who their early kind of like sales like training or like coming of age was
Right.
largely automated, right?
Yes.
Versus
Yes.
like imagine someone coming up like starting their career in like Xerox, going door to door and like selling copiers or
Yeah.
what have you,
Yeah.
or ADP, or like, and that's like field or what have you, or it might be someone who like came up in a Yelp environment or like a Salesforce environment, a Success Factors environment, or what have you, or like an Oracle like BDR or whatever, who is very phone based, right?
Correct.
All of those, of course, require a certain like had expectations around like level of activity that doesn't happen unless like you do it. Like there is no
Yeah.
automation. Um, and-
I remember those days.
yeah, for sure. And then of course, like if you think about it, because a lot of those behaviors aren't like the funnest in the world, that required one kind of like self accountability, but that also there was a managerial component to that where your managers managed in a certain way in order to facilitate that, right? So now if you think about the folks who came up in 2016, 2018, 2020, or what have you, what they have seen as management, like how they were managed, was very different
Mm,
than how folks. And so like they think, oh, like, well, management in a ZERP environment or management in a sales engagement environment, like sales automation environment, ends up looking very different than when things go back to normal, right?
right. Right.
And so what that means for CRO, and this is one of the things that was kind of funny that we see with our customers. You have these CROs or the VPs of sales, or like like VPs of sales enablement or sales operations, whatever, who typically came up in the 90s or in the 2010, or sorry, in the
Mhm.
2000s or the 2010s, and they were like, hey, like, am I taking crazy pills here? Like this is kind of nuts that like folks are so resistant or like non-attuned to kind of accountability. And of course during 2020 or 2021 or 2022, it's like, yeah, but like things have changed this time and now it's kind of gone back to normal. And so what this means is those folks need to like now take the opportunity to coach up their managers. And so there's a number of great ways to do that. My favorite kind of like kind of books on these topics are, one, Jason Jordan's Cracking the Sales Management Code is kind of like the Bible for data-driven sales management. Kind of the notion of like activities, objectives, and results, right? Like you can't
Mhm.
really it's very difficult to positively impact, bookings per se. But what you can do is you can measure these precursors to that, like activities like calling or emailing or like customer facing meetings, and then of course objectives like opportunities reaching stage 2, opportunities reaching stage 3, et cetera, et cetera. So like that's the first thing is like measuring it. And then the next thing, of course, is, as you were saying, Dion, is you can't just measure it and like admire it. You have to manage based on it. And so one of my some kind of favorite books around that, around like how management is about encouragement, but it is also about coaching and it's also about accountability, is uh, Corey Bray and Hillman Sori's Five Secrets of the Sales Coach. Is written
Yeah.
as a narrative. It's quite good. Michelle Vazana's Crushing Quota is another good one as well. It kind of takes the data framework from Cracking the Sales Management Code and then like talks about it in the prod in like in the context of actual management. So like those are two things that you can kind of do as sales leaders to kind of like help your managers who maybe kind of came up in an environment where management was less proactive, or B, maybe didn't, but like also kind of like fell off, in order to kind of like, get them back with the program, if you will.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And so, again, what I'm hearing is a lot of self awareness and for ourselves as leaders, and then also bringing our team along for that ride.
Yeah.
Because to your point, a lot of folks that are hitting the world right now, it's been all about them. And there hasn't been this, hey, think about others and be other centered, right? There's this notion of catering for right or wrong, right? And bringing it out to other people right now. And that, hey, how can I help you is reinforced through an organization's onboarding that says, let me pour into you all the speeds and feeds of our products. And because we built it, they will come. So salesperson, get on the phone, or, even worse, if you're doing field sales and there's no onboarding, but either way, there's always a component. I think everything now is a hybrid, right? Digital and in person, but anyway. So I think that whole notion of here's what you need to say and what you need to do, just do this and it'll be fine. We're not taking into account the other half of the person across the table from us, number one. And number two is if I'm a 25-year-old, I've come up in a world where I'm fully digital. And what Atrium is doing and solving is that digital sales coach, where maybe I want to do it myself. I'm a Gen Xer. I grew up and I was like, I will have to figure it out. Right. So I'm very resourceful and I like figuring stuff out, regardless of Gen X or not. Like, I like to figure stuff out. And sometimes it'll take me longer than if I would just actually partner with somebody. But what I like about, to switch gears with that, is for the people and organizations that are trying to push people to be a little bit more resourceful. I love what Atrium is doing. So talk a little bit about what kind of.
I think the first thing, the notion is, from a performance management, it's like, hey, management is not just about like blowing rainbows up the behind.
No,
staff,
it can be.
right?
It's an accountability component.
Yeah. Now, don't get me wrong. There should be a healthy helping of rainbows, because sales is hard, and like people are being mean to you.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's that, but then there's the other, and so then the next thing would be like, okay, cool. Like I know how to blow rainbows, yay. How do I do these other things? And the way that organizations will do that is, one, break down those output goals, like quota, whatever, into inputs, right? In order to give people like expectations. Like, we talk about this with our customers, and like we have, like, our product is very focused on like streamlining this and like systematizing it and making it very easy, and it's also very rigorous. But organizations will oftentimes do this themselves, from a crawl, walk, run standpoint. Like, first, just setting expectations for what a week ought to look like for a given role, right? So like, with an SDR, it might, especially because they're more junior, it might be like, this is what your day should look like.
100%.
We want to see, we want to see 80 dials.
Yeah.
And we want to see, 40 emails or what have you. And then, that rolls up into a week, and maybe on a weekly basis, maybe it's a couple of opportunities that are created depending on your segment. And then on a monthly basis, it might be this. This might be different than with account executives, where, you're probably not measuring your account executive. Depends, right? You're probably not measuring account executives on customer facing email volume on like a day by day basis, or even customer facing meeting volume on a day by day basis. Maybe you're not even measuring them on a meeting volume basis, like weekly. If they're an inside salesperson, perhaps you might be, but essentially just characterizing them like what their activity metrics, their pipeline creation metrics, their pipeline advancement metrics ought to look like on a weekly, monthly, and quarterly basis. Just setting expectations, like, hey, like, generally speaking, this is like what good looks like here, and because one, if you then set that as an expectation, now people can, like managers now have like backbone for like, yeah, like in this organization, we have
Yes.
we have an expectation that you should have, 10 new opportunities coming into your pipe a month,
Mhm.
right? And you should generally have 10 customer facing meetings a week, of which 2 or 3 are first meetings, right?
Mhm.
So if you set those expectations, now folks now have that in the back of their head, right? So, but the next thing you need to do is you need to kind of come back to that on a recurring basis. And so, one, making sure that there is a space in your operating rhythm for that to happen. We call that like a performance check-in
Yeah.
meeting,
Yep.
right? Which is different. Oftentimes what people do is they create this like giant grab bag of what they call like a one-on-one. And so a
Yeah.
one-on-one might be like, oh, you broke up with your girlfriend. Okay, let's like complain about that, et cetera, et cetera. Or like, let's also talk about your like top deals or what have you. Oh, and so what can be very helpful is to kind of like break that apart and say like, hey, this is our pipeline review meeting.
Yep.
Like, this is our, professional one-on-one here where we talk about, like what's happening from a professional development standpoint or what have you. And by the way, this is our performance check-in, right? Organizations will frequently like that will exist in a QBR. The problem is the QBRs, like they happen every 90 days.
Right.
And so like they're fine for looking at lagging indicators. And then moreover, you might look at the lagging indicators and say like, whoa, you like missed the hell out of your quota. What was the deal? And you might then inspect into leading indicators that you would have preferred to look at 60 days ago.
Yep.
Right. And so instead, what you can do is just make sure that there's space on the calendar for you to come back to those performance KPIs that we set expectations on. And it doesn't have to be super advanced, right? Because
No.
usually in retrospect, when people look back at a busted QBR, you see very basic things. You're like, oh my God, what happened to your op inflow starting like 60 days ago? Well, I don't know.
How about you
Right.
follow that?
Yeah. And so that can be a very easy way of like approaching that to begin with.
Yeah. And that's a really good point too, Pete. So we offer two main workshops for folks, and one is a leadership ambiguous to agile for leader, and it's leadership fundamentals. And then we also offer sales rep to sales pro. Again, all about the fundamentals.
Like
so we're talking about how do we set the table. And to your point, I recently, probably within the last 6 months, talk with sales leaders, and we talk about what are your standards of excellence.
Yes.
And this is where
Great phrase.
I swapped out expectations because I think back in the day,
I like that better.
Yeah. And so because I think it up levels you a little bit. And again, to your point, as a leader, so we create purpose statements for the team, the leader, and then the individuals on the team.
Mhm.
And it all flows from the organization and the leader. Because again, what we're trying to do is get rid of ambiguity. And leaders will say,
Right.
"Oh, there's no ambiguity in my organization." I'm like, "What does
let's pull your reps."
Yes. What needs, and to your point, what I love hearing you say, what made me think about that is there's a level of concreteness that when we have an SDR organization, we're like, yes, we need X, right? We know that we know our formula. And then for some reason it carries this ambiguity into the field sales. And it's like, no, it's the same thing. Your entire customer journey is mapped to your sales journey, and there's no room for ambiguity. You know exactly how many push-ups, sit-ups, squats, and crunches you need to do to get there. You know what I mean? Like there's it's a math problem. And so what I hear you saying is having these standards, and then we have this automatic accountability loop.
Yeah.
The goal
Yeah,
is
and it can't just, I think one of the things that we observe with our customers is like Atrium will automate the consumption of this and like, makes it very easy for you to create, like to declare the goals. Managers still need to, like there's like an eye to eye thing where the reps are like, hey, I don't want to let my manager down. And also like I don't want to let my manager down. Also, they are the one who's going to hold me accountable and maybe offboard me. It's kind of like it's like a carrot and a stick sort of situation. And so this is why having these sort of things baked into an operating rhythm, such
100%.
that the managers are like, it's a weird kind of like the rep needs to know that the manager is consuming it, and the manager needs to know that the rep knows that the manager is consuming this, because then when we come to those meetings, we're like, now, like, hey, we're just going to talk about this thing, versus like, people kind of like dancing around topics or whatever.
Yeah.
So, right.
Wow. I love that too, Pete, because I don't know about you, a lot of times when I'm talking with teams within organizations, I always say that I have favorite aunt status, right? Like I get everything, which is fine. And then part of what I do is encourage and coach folks how to have these important conversations, because exactly what you just said is so many times what needs to be talked about and said isn't being talked about, nor is it being said.
Totally.
Right? Because we dive into talking about people instead of talking about the problem. So every time somebody says, well, so-and-so isn't doing whatever, my coaching and questions are always, okay, well, what is the standard? What is
totally.
what is the problem? And then how do we turn that problem into a project?
Yes, exactly. Right. So Steve Goldberg was one of the he was the CRO at Sales Loft. He had this great phrase that he would say is like, we are not here to admire a problem. And I like what you're describing there is like, oh, we've got this problem. I am observing. We have an expectation that you
Yes.
don't have any untouched opportunities that are in
Right.
that are in a forecasted, right, in a commit forecast category. And I'm observing that you have 7. And so let's go ahead and think about, and you have consistently had greater than the standard of excellence. So let's talk about how we can maybe structure your week such that there is time on the calendar in order for you to do adequate pipeline management, such that you are not dropping these balls, which will negatively impact your win rate. And now what we have done is we have turned a problem into a project, right?
Yep.
And hopefully we wrestled it out to the ground, and like, lo and behold, now they're a pipeline hygiene, master, and then we move on to like whatever the next project is.
That's it, right? It's a spinning plate scenario for all of us managing a book of business. So there's always something. I love that too. And to that point, a lot of what we talk about with folks too is day in the life. And we always talk about it. What are your negotiables and non-negotiables? And I can't tell you how many times I've seen people's heads just explode at the end of the day.
Oh, yeah, totally.
Because we do it, right? We will overwhelm ourselves. But the minute we start compressing activities and putting time next to it, well, I can't do XYZ every day. You can. How much time do you need? And make sure you give yourself
bottoms up
an exit out of that task, right? So yeah. Thank you. It's so brilliant. I love everything we're talking about here. So we've got
fun stuff.
Yeah, and so many good things. What should people do next to find you?
Just find me on LinkedIn. I'm very easy to find there. I'm the only person with this crazy last name on there. So I'm very easy to find there, and don't worry, Google will autocorrect you when you type it in incorrectly. So yeah, find me on there. Find me on Twitter, and we'd love to talk about sales performance stuff. So hit me up there, okay?
I love sales performance conversations, and everybody. He is going to be back with us next Wednesday, June 11th, coming onto our Workout Wednesday show, where he will give a brief overview of Atrium. If there's something specific regarding sales performance you'd like to have addressed, let us know. Otherwise, we will dive into, and I will ask Pete, the number one favorite thing of all his clients right now within Atrium.
So it's the chocolates that we send them, obviously.
What?
No, just kidding. No,
okay.
JK.
But there might be some truth in that too. There's no shame in that. So, all right, everybody, make sure you are reaching out to Pete. Connect with him on LinkedIn. Please be sure to reach out, follow Atrium, take a look at it. It's time for a change in sales performance management, y'all. So join us next Wednesday, and to actually have some standards. It's okay to have standards. And join us next Wednesday as Pete joins us and shows us his platform. All right, everybody, make it a great one and have a great weekend.